So I think we can all agree that knowing how to use Photoshop is a really valuable skill set in today's day and age. In this video, I'm going to give you a brief introduction into how to use Adobe Photoshop in 2023 as a complete beginner. I know how frustrating it can be to learn new software, so I hope this guide is going to be helpful for you. My name is Vince and let's get right into it. So the first thing is when you are going to open Photoshop, this is kind of what you are going to be greeted with. The first step when it comes to creating your first image is to click right here on New File in the top left corner. And then here you are going to be able to set the resolution and all the different settings of your new document. So in this case, I want to create kind of like a tall format Instagram picture. So I'm going to set my width at 1080 and then my height at 1350. Now here you want to make sure it's set on pixels if you are creating digital content and not something like, billboard or anything like that. The resolution, I keep it at this, and all the other settings as well, I like to keep them as how they are right now. So after that, you want to click on create, and boom, just like that, you are entering this new journey of Photoshop, you have successfully created your first document. So congrats on that. Now the next step is to import your image into Photoshop. So as you can see, I have this image of me pulled up right here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and drag and drop that into my document. And as you can see now, I have the ability to kind of like resize it however I want with these little sliders. If I want to basically make it a different aspect ratio or anything like that, I can just hold down Shift and then I'm able to stretch the image however I want to, right? But now I'm not going to do that. I just want to scale it up a little bit more to make it fill out my whole document size, right? So just like that, I am happy with this. So I'm going to click here on this little tick and then it has placed my picture. Now, if I ever want to redo the placement of it or the sizing of it or anything like that, I can always just press Command or Control if you're using Windows and T on my keyboard, and I will get back this menu. So there's that. So now I want to give you a quick overview of the software interface so you get a little bit more familiar with it. First of all, right here in this middle section, you are going to have your main image that you are editing. And then here on the left side, you can see these are going to be some of your key, most important tools that you are using to edit your images. Here in the top right corner, you have your color selector. You have these different swatches, gradients, and patterns, and these are all things you're going to be able to use with your brushes to change the color and so on of that. Now here, if we go a little bit under that, you are going to have your adjustments here, your properties and libraries, and the adjustments you are also probably going to use a lot to change things on your image, like your exposure, vibrance, hue and saturation, and so on. Under that, you will have your layers, channels, and paths tabs. And the layers tab is also something you are going to be using a whole lot because this is where you are able to manage the different separate layers on your image. Now, if we go a little bit under that, here you have the button to create a new layer, a new folder, to create a layer mask and things like that. Now here, if we click on this little thing, you are going to bring up the history tab, and this is also something pretty useful. You can go forward and backward in terms of the changes that you make to your image. So if you ever want to redo something or undo something, you can do that right here really easily. And right here on the top, you are able to change things like your brush settings and just in general the different settings of the certain tool that you are using. Alright, now next up, I kind of want to walk you through some of the most basic and essential tools that you have right here on the left side that you can use to edit your pictures. So the first one right here is the Move tool, which you can also access by pressing V on your keyboard. And with this tool, you're able to move things, around on your picture, and this kind of acts as your regular cursor. This is what you are going to be on most of the time. So you want to remember whenever you are trying to get to your Move tool, just press V on your keyboard, or you can also set up custom shortcuts in Photoshop as well. Now next up, under that, you have the Selection tool. With the Selection tool, or the rectangular marquee tool as it's called, you are able to make a selection around a certain thing on your picture, and if you want, you can copy and paste that, and you can see just like that I was able to cut out this part of me on the image In this case, I don't want to do that, but this can be great for selecting things on your image. And if you right click on it, you can see there are actually different kind of these marquee tools. There is also an elliptical one, single row one, and single column one. Next up, we have the Lasso tool, which you can access by pressing L on your keyboard. This can also be used to create selections. So for example, if I wanted to kind of like draw around myself on this image, I can do that with the Lasso tool just like this. You want to create kind of like a circle, and then it creates a selection for you. Now, if you ever want to exit a selection, I think the easiest way to do it is just to come here to selection and then click somewhere on your image, and then it's going to get rid of it. Now, next up, we have the quick selection tool. This is also great for doing things like masking out certain people in terms of like creating a new, selection and a new layer with them. So for example, if I wanted to put myself on a separate layer, so there is no background, I can just either kind of like, draw over myself with this, and you can see that it's making a selection around my body just like that. And in a few clicks, I was able to select myself. And now if I press Command or Control C and then V, now if I disable this layer, there is no background to this image. By the way, if you want to know how to enable or disable a certain layer, right here you can press on this little eye icon, and then whatever is ticked is going to be visible on your project, and whatever isn't is not going to be visible. I hope that makes sense. Next up, we have the crop tool, which you can use to crop your image to whatever you want, right? You can see I just cropped it. Now I'm going to press Command Z on my keyboard, or Control Z if you're using Windows, to undo this change, because I don't want that. And if you want to redo something, you can just press Shift, Command, or Control Z, and then it's going to redo it. So here are some quick shortcuts you might want to use. Next up, we have the frame tool. You can use this to create placeholder frames for images. I don't use this too much, to be honest. Next up, we have the Eyedropper tool. This is really cool because if you click on this, you can actually select a certain color on your image by simply just, using this, clicking somewhere on your image. And then, for example, if I wanted to get this exact brown that my hair is, I can just click on that, and you can see here now in my color selector, it has selected that exact kind of brown. So that can be a very useful tool. Now, next up, we have the spot healing brush tool. This can be perfect for like fixing little things on your image. So for example, you can see I have this really big snowflake here. If I wanted to get rid of that, I can just click on it, and you can see, boom, just like that, it got rid of it. And usually it is pretty good. Obviously, it's not always going to be perfect, but you can see it can get rid of small imperfections on your image, like even pimples on your face, or if there's like some dirt on your shirt, that rhymes pretty well. Or, if I want to get rid of some of these like snowflakes, it gets rid of them kind of well. If I zoom out, it's not, visible that it was done with this tool. So that is how that could be used. It is using a content aware fill, which basically means that it's, also analyzing what's around it, and it fills it up in the most natural way it can. Next up, I have the brush tool, which you can use to paint over things. I'm going to go ahead, click here on create a new layer, and I'm going to show you how this works. So first of all, here on the top, you can set the size of your brush, the hardness of it, which is basically like how hard the edges of the brush are. You can set the opacity of it, which basically just means how see-through your brush is, and the flow of it as well. With the flow, if you make it lower, then you can kind of like paint over it over and over again, and the more you paint over something, it gets stronger. So with this, you can see I can just paint like that, and if I adjust these settings, you can see how it's affecting it. So for example, now with the flow, now that I changed it, you can see I can as I paint more and more over a certain part, it gets darker and darker there. So with the paintbrush tool, there are so many different ways to use it. You can see they also have these different kind of like brush presets for you that you can use. So this is definitely a tool that you want to master over time. Next up, we have the clone stamp tool, which is also great for taking a certain part of your image and then painting it over somewhere else. But I also like to use it to get rid of small imperfections. Let me show you kind of how it works. So if I wanted to get rid of this snowflake right here, for example, I can go on the certain layer that I want to make the edit to, right? And then I can press Option on my keyboard, and wherever I click, it's going to take the sample from there. And then I can brush over the other part of the image where I want it to go. Actually, I need to use this layer, and you can see now I can paint over that from that area. Now you can see I can also use this if I want to duplicate this. So if I want to add more snowflakes, I can press Option on my keyboard, or I believe Alt if you're using Windows, click on this, and now I can add this exact snowflake to other parts of the image as well, and just painting over it like that. Hope that makes sense. Next up, we have the eraser tool, which you can use, like the name suggests, to erase things from your image. So if I wanted to, for example, just erase a part of me, I can do that like this. And the eraser tool kind of also works as a brush, so you can adjust the settings of it right here, just like how you can do with brushes. Next up is the gradient tool, which you can use to create different gradients. As you can see here, it has a bunch of different presets for you already, or you can click here and set the exact kind of color for your gradient that you want. For example, if I wanted to create a dark gradient, I can, put black there, and it's going to go to transparent on the other side. And if I click somewhere now and drag it up, you can see it created this cool looking gradient. Again, this is another thing you kind of want to try out for yourself and really master how it works, but you can create really cool stuff with the gradient tool as well. Next up, we have the dodge tool, or the burn tool, the sponge tool. I'm not going to go too in depth on these because these would take a little bit more time to explain. But for example, with this one, you can lighten, a certain area of your image just like that. If I wanted to make my face and my head a bit brighter, I can use it just like that, and pretty cool results really fast. Next up, we have the pen tool. This is again another thing that would take a bit longer time to explain how to master it, but with this you can create selections in a more precise way if you wanted to. The way you create the selection is by actually connecting the dots at the end, and then you can click here on selection, and then it will make a selection for you. But basically with the pen tool, the cool thing is if I make a point here, right, or I put down a point there and then here, and then I drag my mouse, I can shape the selection however I want to. So you can be really precise with this if you want to, on curves and edges and stuff like that, just like this, right? Obviously, it would take a really long time to make this perfect and go over my whole body, but you can use this to create like really perfect selections and things of that nature. Next up, we have the text tool. So with the text tool, it adds text to your image. So for example, if I wanted to add a text here, let's say I want to put winter there, I can go ahead, come here to the properties part, and I can change all the different settings of my text here. I can change the size of it, right? I can change the spacing between the characters. I can change the color of it, and so on. And yeah, so that is basically how that works. And if I will move it down a layer, then you can see now it's kind of like, looks like it's behind my head. So this is a pretty cool effect I like to do a lot. With the layers, the way they work is basically, as you can see here, I can change the order of the layers by dragging it and pulling it down, and whatever is on top gets priority on your image. So for example, you can see now I have the winter text layer on top, so that is the one that's visible. But if I pull it under this one, my kind of like cutout, then you can see it's behind it. If I pull it even more down, then you can see it's not even visible, because this layer on top of it is the original photo I was editing in the first place, which has the background. So yeah, that is kind of how layers work. And like I said, you can enable or disable a layer here. Next up is the path selection tool, which you can use to select, a whole path. After that, we have the rectangle tool. And if you right click on that, you can also get access to the ellipse tool, the triangle tool, polygon tool, line tool. These are just tools that you can use to create shapes with. And here on the top, you can change the color of them, the stroke, and so on, all these little things. And with this, you can, draw like this and create shapes and things of that nature. And you can see for every shape I created, it created a new layer on my layers panel as well. If you want to ever delete a layer, just select it and then click delete on your keyboard. Next up, we have the hand tool. You can use this to pan over the different part of your image, just like that. After that, we have the zoom tool, which you can use to zoom in on your image. And here, if you change it, you can also zoom out with this, but I personally prefer, in terms of zooming on my document, I personally prefer either using just my touchpad or pressing Command or Control and then plus and minus keys on my keyboard. Now, if there are any extra tools that you don't have here, then what you can always do is come up here to the top where it says window, and then here you can enable or disable or toggle or untoggle any kind of tools that are not currently visible on your interface. If you're enjoying this one so far and you're learning a lot and you want to learn even more in depth and watch really like step-by-step super detailed videos, go ahead and check out my editing course in the description below, where you can learn even more from me about how to use Photoshop and how to use Adobe Premiere to create amazing social media content. Next up, I want to go a little bit more into the blending modes. This is again something that could be a 10-15 minute video on its own, but basically, to give you an example of how that works, I'm going to take this one. I have this lens flare picture that I downloaded from Google, and I'm going to drag and drop that on my image. Now you can see I can resize this however I want to, and then once I'm happy with the placement, I can come here to blending mode, and you can see now it's on normal, but there are these different blending modes allow you to create composites on your image. So if I put it on lighten or screen, you can see now I was able to get rid of the dark background part of it kind of, and I can use this to create like a lens flare sort of effect on my image, just like that. And I have this scratch picture as well, so just same thing with that. With that also I can set it to screen and add these like scratched photo effect on my picture, right? And the cool thing with that is if I want to, I can come here to my eraser tool. It's gonna ask me to turn it into a smart object. You want to click OK, and then I can just erase certain scratches that I don't want. But you can see with this I added some extra like cool particles and things like that to my picture. So basically with these blending modes, you are creating, like I said, kind of like composites. With these lighten ones and screen ones, you are kind of getting rid of the dark parts of that picture. If you are using these ones, then it's getting rid of the light parts on your picture. And then with these other ones, the hue ones, these you can use to kind of change certain colors on your image. Yeah, I'm going to make a part 2 of this video as well, where I go a little bit more into those, because I simply cannot cover everything that Photoshop has to offer in one short tutorial. But this is going to still give you like a good base to start with. I want to show you a little bit about the blending options. So if you want to access the blending options on a certain layer, you want to right click on it, click on blending options, and here you can add things like an outer glow to the certain things. So now I have my text layer selected. I can add any kind of color outer glow to it. I can add things like a drop shadow to it, and I can change all the settings of that. I can even add things like a pattern overlay to it. So you can see now it added this cool pattern to my text. I can add things like a stroke to this, and this way I am able to add a different color stroke to it, as you can see, and so on. You have so many different settings here as well that you can use to change things about certain layers on your photo. So this is definitely also something you want to kind of learn how to use. I'm gonna make also another more in-depth tutorial about just how to use the blending options themselves, but for now I'm just going to add a cool little outer glow to this winter text and make it look more wintry. And last but not least, before we would go into exporting, I want to show you a little bit about how the adjustment layers work. So to do that, you want to come here to adjustments, and for example, let's say I wanted to add some more contrast to just this image of me, this cutout layer that I have. So to do that, I'm gonna select it. I'm gonna come here to curves, and as you can see, if I click on that, it creates a new adjustment layer and also a layer mask with it. In the second episode of this tutorial, I'm going to explain how to use layer masks a bit more in detail, because they are truly one of the most powerful parts about using Photoshop. But if you want to already learn it, just check out the editing course in the description as well, which teaches you that. But basically now if I want to add some extra contrast on this layer, I can bring down the shadows, bring up the highlights a bit more, and you can see I already added a lot more contrast, but now it's affecting the whole picture, right? It's not that visible since most of the background is white, but it's also affecting the layer under it. So if I only want this to affect the layer that has, you know, me on it, I can always just right click on it, click on create clipping mask, and whenever you create a clipping mask, it's only going to affect the layer right under it. So you can see if I enable it and disable it, I just added some extra contrast to this picture of me. So this is a little bit of an overview of some of the tools that you can use. Now let's go into how to actually export your picture once you are done with it. So what you want to do is you want to come up here to the top where it says file, and then you want to click on save a copy, and then right here you want to click on your computer, save on your computer, and now here you are able to select where you want it to be saved. So I'm just going to choose my desktop in this case. I'm going to name it pic, and then here you can select the format of it as well. If you are trying to export something with no background or like a transparent background, you want to select PNG. Or if you're just you know, trying to export a regular picture for social media or anything like that, I like to use JPEG because it has smaller picture sizes. There is that. I'm going to click on save. Here you can select the kind of quality of the resolution you want to have. I will leave it on maximum, and now I'm going to click OK. And if I go on my desktop, it will have this picture right here. So that is basically how you can export. So I hope this video was valuable and helpful for you. If you want to see a part 2, make sure to subscribe. Also, if you want to learn more about how to use Photoshop in more in-depth, kind of like step-by-step tutorials, and also learn Premiere Pro, check out the editing program, and I will see you guys in the next one.